Brighton, in 1902, was one of the most celebrated seaside towns in England. Sitting 47 miles south of London on the English Channel coast, it had grown from a modest fishing village into a thriving resort town beloved by the British public. The town was well known for its elegant seafront promenade, its grand Victorian hotels, and its famous royal pavilion, the exotic palace built by King George IV in the early 1800s. By the turn of the century, Brighton had become a place where both the wealthy and the working class came to breathe in the sea air, walk along the shore, and escape the pressures of city life. Irene Violet Munro was born on 1902 in Brighton, East Sussex. She was the only child of her mother, Flora Munro. Her father died when Irene was young, and Flora raised her alone. The family lived in Scotland, where Irene lived until around 1909. Then her father passed away, and everything changed. Flora, now a widow and sole caretaker of her only child, made the decision to relocate south. Around 1916, when Irene was approximately 14 years old, the two of them settled in South Kensington, in London. By the summer of 1920, Irene was 17 years old. She was dark-haired and attractive, and was often taken to be in her early 20s. She was sociable, spirited, and full of life. She kept a diary. She wrote letters and postcards regularly to her mother and to friends. She worked as a shorthand typist at a firm of chartered accountants on Oxford Street in London. Colleagues and friends remembered her fondly. She was a young woman beginning to find her independence. Every year, Irene and her mother Flora had travelled together to visit relatives in Portobello in Edinburgh for their annual holiday. In August of 1920, Irene told her mother she wanted to do something different. She wanted to go alone to Eastbourne. She had already holidayed independently the previous year in Brighton, the city of her birth, and felt ready for another solo trip. Flora agreed. She helped arrange the trip and ensured Irene had a safe place to stay. Then, on the 14th of August, Flora herself set off for Scotland by sea, departing from Wapping Pier to visit her own family. 2 days later, on the 16th of August, Irene boarded a train from London and headed south to the coast. Eastbourne in 1920 was a polished and elegant seaside resort. Located on the East Sussex coast, it sat just 19 miles east of Brighton. The town had been designed and built in the 19th century as a resort for the upper classes. Its wide seafront, grand Victorian hotels and carefully laid out streets gave it an air of refinement. Its seafront included a long promenade, a Victorian pier, a theatre, and open views of the English Channel. It was reputed to be one of the sunniest towns in England, sheltered from westerly winds by the chalk cliffs of Beachy Head. Irene arrived in Eastbourne on the 16th of August and found lodgings at 393 Seaside, a boarding house run by a landlady named Mrs. Wynyatt. That same evening, she wrote to her mother, informing her of her safe arrival and mentioning her plans to buy gifts for family members. The following day, the 17th of August, Irene visited Beachy Head, the dramatic chalk sea cliff at the edge of the South Downs, one of the most striking natural landmarks in England. She wrote home again, describing her outing. She seemed to be enjoying herself. But within a few days, she mentioned to her landlady that she was beginning to wish she had gone on holiday with her family after all. She seemed a little lonely. She would not get the chance to change her mind. Jack Alfred Field was 19 years old. William Thomas Gray was 29. Both were local men, unemployed ex-servicemen who had become close companions in June of 1920. Neither had any interest in finding regular work. They had a history of petty theft and robbery and were known locally for targeting female tourists. They were predators operating in plain sight on a busy holiday beach. On 19th August 1920, Irene encountered them. The men struck up what appeared to be a friendly conversation, offering to show her the local sights. They shared a drink, and Irene returned to her lodgings for lunch. That afternoon, she told her landlady she planned to visit Hampton Park, a park less than 2 miles from her lodgings. She left the house. Irene met Field and Gray at a bus stop opposite the Archery Tavern near Pevensey. Multiple eyewitnesses saw them together. One witness recalled seeing her walking arm in arm with Field as the three of them headed toward the Crumbles at around 4 o'clock that afternoon. Field was carrying a walking stick with a dog's head decoration on the handle. 5 workmen labouring on the beach that day also saw the group walking in the direction of Pevensey. When they reached a secluded section of the beach, the men attacked her. Field struck Irene in the face with the ferrule of his walking stick. 2 of her teeth were knocked out. She fell backwards, screaming. Gray then picked up a piece of brick lying nearby and repeatedly struck her on the head. She died of shock. Pathologists later concluded she may have been unconscious for up to half an hour before she died. Gray removed a gold ring from her finger. Her handbag was stolen. The men then buried her body approximately 4 feet deep in the shingle. In their haste, they left one of her feet protruding above the ground. The motive was robbery. There was just under £3 in Irene's purse. Within hours of the murder, Field and Gray visited the Albemarle Hotel in Eastbourne where they bought drinks for the barmaids. Their sudden spending after what appeared to be a windfall was noted by staff. The following day, 20th August 1920, a 13-year-old boy running along the beach almost tripped on the foot protruding from the shingle. He found the partially buried body of Irene Munro. An autopsy confirmed that Irene had not been sexually assaulted. The motive was straightforwardly robbery. Once Irene was identified and her landlady had told officers of her plan to visit Hampton Park, police began visiting hotels and bars in the area. At the Albemarle Hotel, they heard about 2 men known as Billy and Jack, whose spending had changed dramatically in the hours after her murder. A witness named Frederick Wells, who has been working on the Crumbles on the afternoon of the murder, came forward. He'd seen a young woman walking with 2 men on the beach. One of the men had been carrying a distinctive walking stick with a dog's head handle. Wells later spotted Field and Gray while assisting police inquiries. He identified them. Both men were arrested on 24th August. They were initially questioned and released while further evidence was gathered. On 4th September 1920, they were re-arrested and formally charged with Irene's murder. Both were held on remand at Maidstone Jail. A fellow prisoner later told police that Gray had admitted being with Irene on the afternoon of her murder and had tried to persuade others to provide him with a false alibi. The official inquest resumed on 6th September. The jury returned verdicts of willful murder against both men. The trial of Jack Alfred Field and William Thomas Gray opened at Lewes Assizes on 13th of December 1920. Both men were tried before Mr. Justice Avery. Both pleaded not guilty. The prosecution was led by Charles Gill, who described the defendants as unemployed ex-servicemen with a history of petty theft and robbery. Witness after witness placed Field and Gray with Irene on the afternoon of the murder. Only Field took the stand in his own defense. He denied ever having met Irene and claimed the money he had been spending was unemployment benefit received that morning. Neither man's account was supported by any credible witness. The prosecution described their defense as a concoction. The jury found both men guilty. There was a recommendation for mercy. It was not acted upon. In passing the death sentence, Mr. Justice Avery addressed the men directly. He stated, "Jack Alfred Field and William Thomas Gray, you have been found guilty of a foul and brutal murder, and the defense you have both concocted has been demonstrated to be untrue." Both men filed appeals in January 1921. In their appeals, they turned on each other. Field accused Gray of sole responsibility, while Gray blamed Field. The Court of Criminal Appeal dismissed both appeals. Pleas for reprieve were submitted to the Home Secretary. All were rejected. On 4th February 1921, Jack Alfred Field and William Thomas Gray were hanged simultaneously at Wandsworth Prison by executioner Thomas Pierre Point. Irene's mother, Flora, was devastated. Irene was her only child. The two had been deeply close, and Flora would carry the grief of her daughter's senseless death for the rest of her life. In the years that followed, Irene's story was often told only through the names of her killers. The Field and Gray case, as if she were merely a backdrop to the crime. Her own identity, her personality, her diary, her letters, her life, all were largely ignored. Historians and writers focused on the criminals, not the victim. Worse, over time, some accounts unfairly implied that Irene had brought her fate upon herself, suggesting that a young woman who spoke to strangers or traveled alone was somehow to blame for what happened to her. This interpretation has been rightly condemned. Irene Munro was killed in broad daylight on a public beach by two men who deceived her. She bore no responsibility for their actions. In 2021, historian Dr. Jonathan Oates published a full-length biography titled Irene Munro and the Beach Murder of 1920, the first book to place Irene, not her killers, at the center of the story. Using previously unseen police archives, her personal diary, and her surviving letters, Oates painted a complete picture of who she was. The book restored her dignity and her name. The case also contributed indirectly to advances in forensic science. A small beige cat was found near Irene's body, wounded by a gunshot to its leg, though it survived and recovered fully. More significantly, the inadequate state of evidence collection at the Crumbles crimes prompted Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's leading forensic pathologist of the era, to advocate for the creation of a standardized forensic kit. This eventually led to the development of the so-called murder bag, a portable evidence collection kit that was adopted by Scotland Yard and later by police forces across the United Kingdom. Irene Violet Munro was 17 years old. She was a typist from London. She was a daughter. She was a young woman who kept a diary, wrote letters home, and wanted one summer to see the sea on her own terms. She deserved to come home. Hello everyone, thank you for listening, and drop any feedback below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I hope to see you again in the next case, right here on Cold Case UK.